Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third training webinar for school councils and school council members. My name is Nancy Angevine Sands, and I will be guiding you through this evening's session. So I will just share my screen and we'll get started. A couple of things I want you to note before we get started. This workshop is being recorded, so keep that in mind. You will be able to find it on the PCEO TDSB YouTube page. If you just go to YouTube and put in the search engine PCEO space TDSB, all of these workshops will be there, all of the workshops from the PIAC conference and from the Parents as Partners conference, some workshops from a couple of years back, whole pile of learning is found there. If you have any questions as I go on through this, I'm going to answer them at the end. So you can write your questions in the chat, which you will find, of course, at the bottom. I would ask you, if you think of it, to write your question in capital letters. Therefore, if anybody makes comment, which is fine, but when I'm looking for questions, they'll stick out. And you will notice at the top of your screen, if you require transcription of what is being said this evening, you can just click on that. So let's get started. So this evening's training session is called What? No Fundraising. And I will admit this is my favorite. I'm hoping that you will learn a bit more about authentic engagement, how to begin to change and shift the direction that your council has been taking all these years, or if you don't do fundraising, if you do authentic engagement, to get some more ideas of things you can do. I'm going to give you some strategies, and at the very end, we'll talk a little bit about finances. As I've said, my name is Nancy Angevine Sands. I am a former teacher, and I have, for the last almost 2 decades, been a consultant on family engagement, working with school councils, school boards, teachers, pre-service teachers, community groups, all around learning how to engage in your children's education. If you're like me and questions come up after the evening, I always think of things too late, you can find me at withequalstep@gmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at withequalstep. So let's get started. We want to begin by giving acknowledgement of the traditional lands. We acknowledge that we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and the Inuit peoples. So before I get started, I should have said at the beginning, I see that a number of you are back joining me again from other of the workshops we've had this year. Welcome. There'll be a couple of things that you will already have heard. I repeat them because they always bear repeating. But look at it this way, you'll know the answer. So why no fundraising? Well, if for no other reason than coming through the pandemic, continuing with the pandemic, all of the articles, some research, concerns about parent caregivers, concerns from teachers are telling us that a lot of our students are falling behind and are not where they were expected to be. And we also know from tracking our student across the world, tracking student achievement, that the schools that had practiced authentic engagement prior to COVID arriving, they did better. Their students did better, their parents felt easier, the teachers were less stressed because they had already started to build those partnerships. They had already started to work with their parents and caregivers to understand how to support learning at home. So There are many reasons why fundraising is not the number one thing that our council should be doing, but let's just look at where we are now. So those of you who've joined me before, you will recognize my little guy down in the corner. Keep your eye on the ball. And that is the mandate of school councils. The purpose of school councils is through the active participation of parents to improve pupil achievement and to enhance the accountability of the education system to parents. And the primary means of achieving this purpose is making recommendations in accordance with the regulations to the principal and the board, and they even say the ministry that established the council. And to do other work, and those recommendations would come from the work that you are doing with your parent caregivers. You will see in here that it doesn't say anything about fundraising. In fact, if you go through regulation 612, fundraising is a little bitty bit near the end. So what I'm hoping to emphasize this evening is that what our councils need to do is to shift from doing for the school to doing for parents, students, caregivers. Right? There's a lot of research out there that tells us that when we engage authentically with our parents and caregivers around student achievement, our kids do better. I have asked for a number of years for people to find me an article that tells me that fundraising helps student achievement. I haven't found one, and no one has brought one forward to me. So I put that out to you this evening. If you find a research paper that tells me that fundraising helps student achievement in really significant ways, send it to me, please. I want to read it. I went in last night. I thought, I'll just look around, see if I see any articles. And I saw one article that says, fundraising helps student achievement. I thought, what? And I clicked on it. Guess what? It was written by an organization that does fundraising for school councils. So be careful when you're looking. So why do we have parent caregiver engagement? Now, those of you who have been at the other training sessions, you're going to be able to answer this really easily. And for those of you who haven't been, don't worry about it. You'll do okay. If you think of your student from the time they entered school in junior kindergarten until they graduate in grade 12, I want to know what percentage of their life is spent asleep, what percentage is spent in school, and what percentage is spent away from school with family, with friends, playing games, doing other things. So I'll ask you to just take a minute and consider that question. Just put it in your head. What percentage of their life is spent doing these three things? Ready? All right, 32% of their time is spent asleep. 17% of their time is spent in school, and 51% of their time is spent away from school. And as I said in the previous workshop that I did, I have seen the time in school as low as 13% of their time. But I booted it up a bit to, be fair. 17% is spent in school, right? We know that learning and education happen outside of school. What happens in school is schooling, is the teaching of a curriculum that has been prescribed by people who have been hired to do that. If we are not engaged in our children's learning in that 51% of the time that they are out of school, then we're not taking advantage of a very large opportunity that we have to help our pupils to achieve to the best of their ability. So parent engagement, what is it? Well, it's a partnership, or I like to say a collaboration, a shared leadership, and a commitment between you, the teacher, the school, and your broader community. It continues across a child's life, and it's deeply rooted in the parent, caregiver, and staff identities, both cultural, racial, linguistic, faith, orientation. It cuts across and it reinforces learning in the multiple settings where children learn. in your mosques or churches, in the playground, at home, with family and friends. And it enhances the ability of parents and caregivers to effectively support their children's learning. Now, I've already said authentic family engagement. And here's our guy with his eye on the ball, right? Authentic family engagement is relational. It's about building relationships. And we talked about that in the previous workshop. It is linked to learning, and it builds the capabilities of our families to support that learning at home, right? The activities that your council may choose to do throughout the year do not always have to hit all three of these. But when you're thinking of something to do, you should ask yourself, is it relational? Does it link to learning? Or does it build the capabilities of our families to support learning? If it doesn't do at least one of those things, then it's not authentic family engagement, and it's not meeting your mandate as laid out in Regulation 612. So I'd like you to take a minute. I've got here to put in chat how you, just do that. Just write in chat, how have you in the past as a council, how have you engaged your families? Just see if I can. Okay, you've done surveys, virtual coffee chats, workshops, events, has hosted many events to bring our families together. Yeah, I'll get to that in a second, Shelley. We've done committees and potluck, approaching parents directly in the yard. That's good. It's relationships, linked to learning, and building the capacity of capabilities of parents. Tea and talk, emergency gift cards for food and school supplies. These are really great things. Okay. You think I would be better at this. I'm just so bad. Technology. Okay, so you've done a lot of really great things. Some, let's explore and see if they are authentic engagement, or what we would term, and I maybe should have talked about it. What I like to talk about is there's involvement and there's engagement, right? There's involvement and there's engagement. So if you talk to a parent on the schoolyard, say, hi, how you doing? That's maybe closer to involvement. If you're looking to ask what they need and how you can help them, you're moving more into engagement. But let's move on, and I'll explain that a little bit better. So the U.S. Department of Education, in linking with Harvard University, came up with this chart of the impact of family engagement strategies on student learning. What they found is things like, and if you look at the left of the page, fundraisers, potlucks, music nights, plays, celebrations, they have a lower impact on student learning than do, let's say, parent-teacher conferences. When I work with teachers on this, I also say it depends on what the parent-teacher conference looks like. If you come in and sit down and just talk to your parent and that's it, that's involvement, that's not engagement. Parent training events, moving all the way up to modeling learning strategies, helping parents with learning projects, talking about goal-setting activities and regular personalized communication. So you can see from this, all of these things are useful, and all of these things can be done throughout the year without being a waste of your time. But the ones towards the right are what I would term as authentic engagement, and they are things that have been proven through research to have a higher impact on student achievement. So what does that mean for you as a school council? So where can you begin to figure out what your parents and caregivers need to be able to link what they do at home to learning and to build their capacity, their capabilities of doing those things? Well, surveys, and a couple of you said that you do surveys, surveying parents and caregivers to identify not just their needs, but their knowledge, because that could be useful to you too down the road. Where could you take parent? Sometimes we tend to think that teacher knowledge is the be all end all and it's everything we need, but we're sitting on a massive fund of parent knowledge that we could use in various aspects in our schools. I'll give you an example. At least a decade ago, I was doing a workshop, a series of workshops for newcomer parents. And there was a father there who had been a journalist in Afghanistan. And he was here now working in a warehouse. What he could bring to the school, to learning in his school, particularly if his kids were in high school. He could talk about world issues. He could talk about geography. He could talk about media. I mean, he could do that in public school too. Our parents are sit on a wealth of knowledge. So identify their knowledge, identify their needs so that pupil achievement and making the system accountable to parents. Now, how can you survey? Well, go up and just talk to them. Stand there with the old-fashioned clipboard and ask them questions. Send something home electronically. Email them or send a hard copy of a survey home and ask them to return it. If you have signed up, and if you haven't, I hope you will, signed up for the school email address through the TDSB, then you will have access to Thought Exchange. And if any of you have done any of the town halls in the last couple of years that the PCO run, you'll know Thought Exchange. Thought Exchange is a really great way to poll your parents. You can just put out a question and say you have the next 2-3 days to answer this question, and people can just write in and Thought Exchange will correlate it for you and let you know what people think about it. So surveying your parents. If you do a survey of your own, what could it look like? I produced one a couple of years ago, and if you would like to have a copy of it, I'm happy to share it with you. Just write to me. You want to ask them a series of things. You would like to know, where do your parents feel that they need support in helping, in supporting their child's learning? Do they need it in specific academic areas? Do they need it in homework, time management, whatever you've heard from your friends or on the school ground where parents are struggling with that? And then there's other things that they might want to know about. They might, if you're the parents in grade 3 and grade 6 and grade 10, they might want to understand more about EQAO, discipline and behavior. Your parents, the children that have been identified with exceptionalities may want to know some aspects of special education. Your newcomer parents or parents that are new to Ontario may want to understand the system, the education system in Ontario, and how do they navigate it. So think of things that you've heard of that are important to you, but also that you've heard from others where they may be struggling. And then sometimes what we forget to ask them is, how do they want to receive this learning? We tend to think of stuff. Those of us who sit around the school council table, we're already engaged. We have to understand that. We are engaged in our kids' learning because it brought us out to the school council. It put us around the table. Our social capital, our comfort within our community, within the system, has brought us there. And we sometimes assume that what we want to know is what everybody else wants to know. Not always. And we also assume that how we want to learn it is how everyone else wants to learn it. Not always. So if you really want to help your parents, give them what they need to build their capabilities, you have to ask them how they want the support. And when is the best time to offer it? And you know what? If you offer a workshop, it's okay to offer it twice, one in the evening, one in the daytime. Make it available. You could even tape it. And if you have a website or a Facebook page or something, the school has a website, you could tape it and put it up on the website. So I'm going to go through some strategies with you, and I'm going to take some things I've heard, saw in the chat that you do, which were great, but maybe more on the left side of that chart, more what we would term involvement. And I'm going to give you just a quick suggestion of how you might tweak it a little bit to make it become closer to engagement. So let's begin with movie night. I hear a lot of schools do movie night. And this could even work if you had math night or something like something where you bring everybody together in the gym for an evening. But let's look at movie night. So movie night, you watch a movie, you serve some refreshments, maybe even serve dinner. Everybody has a good time and they go home. That's involvement. It is a little bit leaning towards engagement because it could be about building relationships. If you're sharing a meal together and you're talking with other parents and caregivers who are there, but it's about meeting new people too. So if you're sitting with your friends, it's not really about relationship building. How can you tweak that and move it into engagement? Well, after the movie, you could break everybody into small groups and have a discussion that would be led by a teacher, if anybody's there, or led by school volunteers or school council members who have been trained for this. And during this discussion, you want to talk about the movie, but what was the plot of the movie? Who were the main characters and who were secondary characters? Why are the main characters important? How do the main characters move the story along? Can you predict what would happen if this movie continued or if there was a part 2 to the movie? Now, what are you doing here? Well, you're linking the movie and what they saw and what they enjoyed, you're linking it to learning, because now the parents, and you could do, I should have said, you could do the groups as a mixture of parents and students, or you could have the students in their groups and the parents in their groups. So you're linking it to learning. You're showing the parents and the students. And my kids would have said, oh, great, you just ruined the movie by putting learning in it. But you're teaching them that they can use the movie or a TV show to talk about things that the kids will be talking about in school when they read books, because plot and character and prediction are all part of reading and literacy development. So the methods they are learning, they can take home when they watch TV with the kids, when they read books with the kids, when they discuss what happened at school. And this works at all grade levels, from kindergarten right through to grade 12, right? Tell me about the book you read. Maybe I think at the last one I said how important reading was, that in the beginning you may be reading to them, then you're reading with them, and then they're reading to you. And then finally, maybe your high school student is reading a book and you're reading it too, and you're discussing it. This is teaching your parents some of the key things that they would need to know in supporting literacy learning. And it's also important while you're planning this to go to your teachers and ask them, what sort of things should parents know to be able to support literacy at the home, and get some ideas about what you could do for group discussion. Okay, that's one thing. Arts night, music nights. We have them all the time. You come in, you sit in the gym, or in the auditorium if you're in high school, you listen to the performance, and then you go home. What could we do to link this to relationship buildings and learning? What if we invited our students or our parents and caregivers to share their cultural music, their arts, their stories? What if, as part of the performance, that was a part of the performance, or afterwards, they set up in the hallway and you could have refreshments there, and they were performing their music, or demonstrating some of their art, or having a storytelling session where they were telling some of their stories from their culture. You are building the relationships between school and home. School is starting to see the value that sits in parent knowledge, and parents and caregivers are starting to feel like, oh my goodness, I have something to offer, and my culture and my learning is valuable in my child's learning. And you're also sharing relationships between the parents who are learning about each other and what they do in music and art and storytelling. So that's 2. What about meet the teacher night? Usually meet the teacher, meet the creature. It's usually an orientation at the beginning of the school year, usually, unless things have changed drastically in the last year, well, pre-COVID. You go, you sit in the gym, you get talked at for a few minutes by somebody, then you get out, you walk down to the child's classroom, you meet the teacher, you say hello, the child shows you something they did that's sitting on their desk, and then you leave. What if we added to that a meet the family night? And this would require you as a council working in partnership with your teachers. Help, not just saying to them, you got to do this, but helping them. This is what we'd like to do. What would you need, staff, to be able to do this? How could we help you with this? It should be an opportunity for the families to share their hopes and their dreams for their child. I was in a classroom a couple of years ago. It was a kindergarten classroom in downtown Toronto. And the teacher had built, well, she actually brought in a great big branch off of a tree, a dead branch off of a tree, and she put it in a planter. And then she had little cards with ribbon in them, and she asked the parents to write what was one dream or one wish they had for their child that year. And then they hung it on the tree, and that tree sat in the classroom all year long. And she referred to it, and she used it in her lessons with the students, in referring back to, oh, look, this is what your mom and dad said there. What do you hope for yourself? It's a way for the teacher to learn about the parents, for the parents to have a feeling that they are part of the classroom. And for the activities maybe going forward that the teacher plans, or even that you as a school council, in going around and looking at what sort of things afterwards, what sort of things were said in the different classrooms about what did the teachers learn about their families, and how could the activities that you plan for the year be a reflection of what they heard. It's also a good opportunity to introduce the school council to your parents and caregivers, let them know what you're doing. It's a good place to do the survey, talk to them, invite them to the council meetings, let them know when they're going to be, or get their have some way, how would they like to be contacted, so that they know that. School council meetings. A lot of times, school council meetings are really about involvement. And I had 3 children. I was in the system as a parent for a very long time, because each child was 3 years apart, in a very long time. I spent a lot of time at school council meetings, and some of it was lost time. Some of it was hours I won't get back, because it was just a series of reports, a little bit of new business. The council would come up with an idea, there'd be discussion or arguments around it, and then we would go home. How can you change your meetings so that you are building relationships? You are linking the meetings to learning. You're building the capabilities of your families. Well, I strongly suggest that all of the reports that are made, the chair, the principal, the teacher reports, committee reports, all be written ahead of time, and they can be done in point form. They don't have to be written out all beautiful paragraphs, and submitted to the chair, who sends them out with the agenda. And then at the meeting, the only thing the people do, including the principal, is report, talk about maybe one, maybe two of the most important things in the report, highlight the things that they think are most important that people pay attention to. Then a little bit of time where the people in the audience can ask questions of the person who submitted report. Ask them for clarification, ask them about something that's, especially with the principal or the teacher report, something that's come up that they would like information about. If you do this, you cut the report time down to maybe half the amount of time. That now leaves you the opportunity to use that extra time of the council to offer a learning module, to bring in a teacher or a board member to speak about something that you've identified the parents want to learn about learning. Maybe you're going to talk about, maybe something about literacy was identified, so you're going to talk about that. Or maybe discipline is something that you've heard that they want to hear about. There's time to talk about that. Or you break your group into conversation circles. If you can do this online, you go into breakout rooms and you give them a question that they have to discuss and a time limit. You want to make sure that everybody understands the rules for how this works, so that nobody is dominating the meeting, either in person or in a breakout room. And you talk about something. So you could be discussing at the beginning of the year, what are my hopes? What are my hopes for my child this year? Or the question could be, I'm going to go back to literacy. What are some ideas that you've had to get your children to read? Or to have group family reading time at home, something where people can talk, can share information. And then you want them to report back. And then you want to take what you heard from the learning module or from the conversation circle, and you want to have that reflected in some cases in your work going forward. I'm going to be talking more about conversation circles in the next workshop, which is called Go to the Margins. So I don't want to spend too much time talking about it here. But conversation circles are a really good way to hear from your parents and caregivers, to build relationships, to learn from each other. Finally, the information that we send home. And this is not just the information that you send home. I want to say, as school council chairs and as school council members, you are leaders in education. And I know a lot of times you don't feel like that, or you don't think that you have that role, but you are. You were established as leaders by the regulations, and it's been that way for quite a while. So it's not just about the information that you send home. It's not just about the things that you do, but it's also about finding the comfort level within yourself and with your principal and your teachers to pass on and share your learning with them. And not just, I don't just mean the learning that you're getting in these training sessions, but the learning that you get from your parents and caregivers, what you've heard from them, and to share that with your principal and your teachers, and to collaborate with them to try to figure out the best way to do things. And one of that is information sharing. If you were at the last training session, you will know that I talked about communication as being the #1 way to build relationships and how important it is. So the information that you send home and how you send it home is really important. If the information you're sending home is just, this is what we're doing, this is when we're doing it, thanks for helping, this is what I need from you, either a call for volunteers or a call for money, then that's involvement. That's not about building relationships. It's not linked to learning. It's not building their capabilities to support learning. But if the information you send home has a component in it that's 2 ways, if the information you send home is responding to the needs that you've identified in talking to your parent caregivers, remember I said back of the surveys is asking them how do they want to receive this information? Well, some of them just want to receive it online, or they want to receive it in an email coming home or a newsletter coming home. So you're identifying the needs and you're responding to them the way they want to be responded to. It has to include a method for them to respond back to you. If not, it's a monologue. It's not a dialogue. Right? You have to be seeking, not in every single time you write to them, but the majority of times is seeking input from your parents and caregivers, seeking new ideas, and then letting them see what they've said reflected in what you do moving forward. All of the stuff you hear back should inform your goals and your activities. So, is there anything else that you can do? So I'm going to get away from what you've done and how you could tweak it a little bit. And maybe these are some new ideas. I hope so. Community walks for teachers. These can be sponsored by the school council. They can be led by students or parent caregivers. They, of course, would have to happen during school hours, so you would, or immediately after school. So you would have to work with the teachers to figure out how to do it. I have done this a number of times with teachers. I haven't done it any time that the teachers haven't learned something and haven't come away saying, oh, wow, I didn't know that. Oh, you know what? I could use that in a teaching thing. We could take the kids out. We could take the kids to that place, and we could do such and such. So what you're doing is exploring your school community. I would bet that the majority of teachers in your school, if not 100% of them, do not live in the community where they teach. They drive in, they park, they teach, they drive out. They don't explore, they don't drive around the streets to see what's there. When you do a community walk, you're exploring the community with your teachers, with your parents and caregivers, with your students. Everybody's talking, everybody's learning from each other. They're building relationships. Show them, where do the kids play? Where do they meet up? Where are places they avoid? Or, you know, every neighborhood has a place where, oh, that's where creepy old lives, right? Where do they go to play sports or games? Where do they shop? Where do you worship? It's an opportunity for your teachers to learn and observe, and it's an opportunity to link with curriculum. And this is how you get buy-in from the teachers. Are you doing a session on mapping? Are you doing something on community building? This is throughout our curriculum, through all of the grades. There are links to this. I cannot overemphasize the value of community walks. I've already talked about listening sessions. I love listening sessions. They can be part of your school council meeting. They can be separate. Someone put in the chat that one of the activities they did was tea and chat. That's a listening session. It's an opportunity to listen to what your community has to say. So at the beginning, you having talked to your parents and caregivers, the council would brainstorm some issues or some ideas that they could use for group discussions. Then they would invite their parents and caregivers to take part in it. You might have to run them at different times, like maybe sometimes you have them in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon, maybe you have them in the evening. See what would work for your community, what works best. You have to set ground rules for discussion and have a moderator for each of these listening sessions. All right. The ground rules are following almost the code of ethics that you can find on the school council website. We will speak one at a time. We will give everyone an opportunity to speak before someone can speak again. You know, those types. What would you like to be the rules to be if you were going to be part of a group discussion? Resist the pull to defend current practices. You are going to hear things sometimes that are critical of the work that you do, or that are critical of the work that happens in the school and the current practices. Don't defend it. Just listen. And be open to the perspectives, the wide perspectives of the group, but also seek solutions from them. These aren't complaining sessions. They're listening sessions. They're relationship building and learning sessions. So if you're talking, you have one issue that you want to talk about, maybe it's a particular equity issue in your school, then you're going to talk about that one particular thing. Seek ideas, seek solutions and ideas from them. It's always lovely if the principal or their designate or a teacher is at one or some of them, because there are going to be questions. Most of the questions are going to be what's happening at the school, and you want to let the principal know or the teacher know that these are listening sessions. So you're here for background information so that when a question comes up, they can answer it. Just like at school council meetings, you don't want personal issues brought up, but you want to make it clear that if someone has a personal issue, they could come to the chair of the council, and the chair could direct them where to go. I just want to say very quickly about this. I also have a podcast, and I interviewed a teacher and a researcher from Britain. When he was a principal of his school, he started listening sessions at his school with the equivalent of school council. It wasn't the school council, but the school council was representative. But he started it with parents who had complaints. And he brought them together, and he brought some teachers together, and they started talking, and they started listening, and they talked about the complaints. And then he sort of said, okay, how are we going to solve these? And by the end of the school year, sometimes a new parent would come in and would start going, I don't like this. And they no. That's not how we do it here. We listen to each other and we try to find solutions. And it just changed the whole atmosphere in the school, and it brought parents and teachers together as collaborators to figure out and make the system accountable. Okay, I've talked long enough about that. Another thing, keeping our eye on the ball there about student achievement and making the system accountable, are school tours. This is particularly helpful for middle school and high school parents and caregivers, and for middle and high school school councils. It could happen at a school as part of a school council meeting. You could have it on curriculum night. Some schools already do something like this, but what happens is, instead of you can do it in elementary school too, but in middle and high school, you give the parents a made up school schedule, like their kids would have. You give them a map of a school. you set up a fake day. So every class is like 15 minutes long. And they see from the schedule, let's say they have to start in room 113 for math. So off they go to 113 for math, and there's a teacher there who's going to speak to them, maybe about assessment and evaluation. That's the one thing parents want to know for sure. And then the school bell goes, or the buzzer comes through the PA system, and now they have to go to room 206 for English. Well, where's 206? And the bell's going to go when the class starts. And so they have to look on their map, and they have to look where they are. And then they have to get all the way up to 206. And they get there and they learn about how you're assessed and evaluated in English in high school. And then the buzzer goes again, and it's period 3. And oh my goodness, they got to go to phys ed, and phys ed is in D wing. Where's D wing? By doing all of this, they're learning what their child's day is like. They're learning that their child has to go from here to there to there, that what the rooms look like, what the seats feel like, where the teacher stands, where the other students are. Plus, they've learned something specific in the classroom from the teacher. So it's really it's a really broad learning opportunity for them. You can do this in elementary school as well, just doing a tour of the school. There have been some places that do tours, and I just mentioned this briefly, just to think about it, where they do tours in elementary school during the day. And they meet up, and they are given a sheet of paper, and they're asked to write down, what do you want to know about what your child is learning, and what are you looking for? And then they're taken on a tour of the school, specifically guided by someone, where they go into some of the classrooms as they are being run. This can also happen in middle and in high school. The only reason it might not is if your child doesn't want you to be there. But they go in, they silently stand at the back of the classroom, and they observe the lesson that's going on for maybe 15 minutes, making notes. Then they leave and they go to the next one. And they go to a couple of classrooms around the school. Then they meet up again, maybe in the library or the staff room, and they sit and they talk about what did they learn and what surprised them. And they will be surprised about what they learned. But now they've learned about their child's day at school. And this is really important for when their child comes home and they ask them about their day. And how did it go? And, oh, I noticed that in your classroom you had a such and such, and how did that work? Or for the high school kids, like, do you have any trouble like getting from, like, how much time do you have to get from one class to the next? How's that working for you? So I'll talk for just a minute about engagement in high school. You need to know this as school councils. Communication, communication, communication. It's so important because it's difficult for parents and caregivers to get communication that they want from the teachers. Sometimes because the teachers just aren't oriented in high school towards engaging their families. Sometimes because the teachers have 5 classes that they have to teach, and they don't have time. They think they don't have time to contact 60 parents. Sometimes because the parents don't know who all the teachers are and what information they should be getting. So as a school council, it's incumbent, it's really important to find out what information aren't parents getting, and is there a way that you could provide it? I mentioned assessment and evaluation because parents want to know about that. Just running a session on assessment and evaluation, running a session on My Blueprint, which is, for those of you who aren't in high school, it's when the students choose their options each year, and learning to plan for the future. High school is a complex structure. Your students have more than one teacher. We've already talked about they're not in one classroom on a day, they could be in 5 or 6 different classrooms. And it's a different structure also just in how it works, and how, as a parent caregiver, who do you contact and who you talk to. So teaching your families how to navigate the middle school and secondary system is vitally important. And then finally, as I said in the previous workshop, engagement in high school is more about being a coach. It's about helping your students select the courses and the programs that they would need, and understanding that, what do you want to do maybe when you leave high school, and how can we plan to make sure that you got that? Or what do you like, and you want to take those courses, and maybe you should take this course too, just in case. It's about helping them to manage their time. How do they do schoolwork and time with friends? And if they're in sports or extracurricular activities, if I learned time management, my life would have been much easier. Creating learning spaces in their home, in your home, and learning times, and providing them with enriching experiences outside of school. That could be extracurricular activities. It could be sports. Some of those things are really expensive and hard to manage. It could just be, as a family, going to the park or walking through your community and looking at it with different eyes. And then, as I said in the last one, helping your child to create a vision for themselves, a vision for where they would like to be at the end of this year. Where would they like to be at the end of next year? Where would they like to be when they graduate high school? Do they have an idea of what they might like to do after high school? Do they want to go into the trades, into college, into university? They want to go straight into the workplace. What sort of things do they love to do? What really excites them? And how would that translate into something that could carry them on through their life, helping them to understand, to have a vision about themselves? Not that you created, but that they created, and that maybe you helped them through. So I promised I was going to talk about money a little bit. The TDSB policy and procedures for fundraising, if any of you were at the session last night, you cannot fundraise without having a purpose, right? And you cannot carry money over for more than 2 years unless you have a stated long-term plan. So you are fundraising for something that you want to do this year that's going to impact the students in the school this year, and that you have let the parents know this is why we're fundraising, this is where the money's going. So how do you do that? You start with the school council. The school council will have to determine their financial needs, and those financial needs will come from surveying the parents and plans that you have made. All of the things that I've talked about this evening could require some money, could require some fundraising to provide the training and the capability building that we've discussed. So if you need money, you could go, if you have a budget committee, go to the budget committee. They allocate money based on council directives, and they would advise the council on any shortfall. So the council decides, we're going to do a number of learning sessions for parents so they can help, they can build their capabilities to support learning at home. And we figure it's going to cost us $500. And the budget committee says, well, just as the TDSB advised, we spent all of our money last year and we don't have any money left. So we're probably going to have to raise maybe $200, because we do have money on budget line 41,500 from the province and the TDSB that we could use. And they give that information back to council. If council decides, they can form a fundraising committee, and the fundraising committee will come up with suggestions of how they could raise that $200 to $500. They have to be accountable. This is what we're suggesting. This is why we're suggesting it. This is how much money we think we could raise and how long it would take. And this is what it would require of our parents and caregivers. And considering the community that you live in and the capabilities of the families within your community to contribute, if they wanted, to the fundraising project. Those suggestions go back to council, and council looks at that. They are responsible for it. They vote on the fundraising activity. They vote on the disbursement of funds, and they are responsible for keeping a record of all the money that comes in and all the money goes out. You will notice my little guy at the bottom of the page. All of this is dependent upon activities that assist pupil achievement and make the system accountable to parents. I'm going to leave you with this one thought because I really love this. Parent involvement, remember I talked about involvement, as practiced in most schools and reflected in the research literature, avoids issues of power and assigns parents a passive role in the maintenance of school culture. And this we see most evident in our fundraising activities when we do for the school. Parent engagement designates parents as citizens in the fullest sense. They are change agents who can transform urban schools and neighborhoods. That's engagement. That's fundraising to make a difference in your families, in your parents and caregivers, in your students. I'll just end by reminding you of upcoming workshops. On November the 1st, I mentioned it already, going to the margins. This is about different ways that you can work with your parents, but more importantly, it's about going to the parents that we rarely hear from, the ones that are erroneously termed the hard to reach, and how to bring them in. November the 9th, I'm going to be talking about the school improvement plan. The SIP, many of you have probably heard of that. You have a role as designated by both the ministry and the board to collaborate in the production of the school improvement plan. And then on the 17th, I'm talking about bylaws again. So there's some questions, and we'll just.
There are, Nancy. I can read them if you want.
Yes, everyone. Margaret Horvath has joined us. She is.
Oh, I've been here for a while.
Oh, there. She's always sneaking in. The Office Administrator of the Parent Community Engagement Office, and could be your lifeline. Okay, Margaret.
Let me just finish this thing I'm putting into the chat. Okay. All right, the first one, and this was something that I actually copied down. The biggest gap in parental knowledge for some communities is knowledge of the TDSB/school system and in how to hold the school system accountable. The TDSB continues to place a lot of the burden of addressing equity issues within the school system back onto parents. How does the TDSB support, counsel parents in changing the culture which other parents, teachers, principals, etc. are invested in protecting? How will the TDSB support parents, particularly Black and Indigenous parents, as we continue to shoulder the burden of the system's levels failure to address racism? How will TDSB be accountable to us parents who are already doing this work? Kind of outside of the scope of this meeting.
No, but you know what? Very good
yeah.
question, and very, very important questions. I'm trying to sort of
There's a few questions in here, so maybe what you can do is just address one of the questions at a time. So how does it?
I can't. Yeah, I don't feel qualified to speak on behalf of the TDSB.
And I think some of these are Michelle questions.
Yeah, they are questions for Michelle, and they're questions for the TDSB. What I would suggest, though, I think that as Margaret was reading it, the first thing that came to my mind, and please, I'm not trying to pass the buck here. Two things is, I think those are fantastic questions and fantastic discussion topics to come up at a school council meeting or at a listening circle or a conversation circle or whatever you talk about it, to bring your parents together and to discuss. You would have to break it down into smaller topic areas, not a broad equity issue, but if there was a specific equity issue that had come up in your school and that was causing that needed to be discussed, I would bring that up at a school council meeting, and not as a just a one-off on the agenda, but after the business portion of the meeting, we are going to hold a learning session, and this is the topic. And you, of course, you would have discussed it with your principal ahead of time. And maybe what you do, maybe if this is a big topic, this is a big topic in a lot of our schools, let's be honest, is that it's a series of sessions that go over a couple of months. And the first one is, what's the TDSB policy on whatever? What is the school's policy on, and then you branch out, and then what is really happening on the ground? How is this policy affecting the students in our school? How is it affecting the parents and caregivers? How is it being followed? How isn't it being followed? What suggestions do we have as a council for to go forward to the board for changing the policy? The second thing I'd say, Margaret, I see the second thing is equity is one of the branches of the school improvement plan, and schools, councils, and parents and caregivers must be consulted on the construction of the school improvement plan. And that doesn't mean, here's the school improvement plan that we and the staff wrote up, and what do you think? You'd like it? Okay, good, thanks very much. No, that's not consulting. That's not. It's about, and there are various ways that can be done, and I'm going to talk about it in the workshop, and principals are learning about it too, where they consult with you. Equity is one of the 4 issues, and that's a place where parents should be saying, this is what's not working, and this is why it's not working. Here's our suggestion. This is some plans that the school should put into effect, and then the council should be looking at those too, and how can they support it? Margaret?
What I was going to say too is, when you were talking about those series of meetings, remember that you can always have representatives of different departments at these meetings, so they can speak specifically to whether it's policies or procedures or how things are handled at the board with reference to whatever the topic of that meeting is.
Yeah. I hope that answered it. I don't want to, it's a very big issue and a very important issue, and something that has to be addressed, and not in a meaningful way.
And definitely engagement, not involvement.
Yep. Next.
Okay, so the next one is, please provide suggestions to get teachers on board when they already feel they are at max capacity. Okay,
great question. You know what? I just want to go back to that last question. As both Margaret and I said, this is a question that Michelle Monroe, who is Central Coordinator for Parent and Community Engagement Office, is far more qualified to answer. So, yeah, I would write to her too if you have some specific questions or some specific issues that you want to do. I would also say, no, it's okay. Go on. Sorry, do that one again. Oh, teachers, how to get teachers in when they're already feeling overworked.
Yeah.
Good question. The last couple of years have been hard for parents and caregivers, students, and really hard for teachers. And it's not easier this year. I think look, engagement is about relationships. It's about building relationships. And you can't build relationships without communication. And I said that about parents and caregivers. The same is true with teachers. It's about building relationships with your teachers And the way to do that is through communication. You have a teacher representative on your school council. If you don't have a teacher representative on your school council, you want to go to your principal tomorrow morning and say, we're supposed to have a teacher representative on our school council. When will you be holding an election so that somebody comes out and takes that position? And if one person doesn't want it, 2 or 3 parent teachers could share it. It only gets 1 vote. And then it's about making sure that the teachers know that their role is, 1, to report at council meetings about just things that they see as teachers around the school, things that they think that parents might want to know. And then 2, participate in the discussion and votes. And 3, to take what they hear from council back to the teachers. All right. They are the liaison between school and home in a council. That's starting your relationship building, but it's also about communicating with them and saying, you know, we're here to help you as a council. We're here to help you. Is there anything we can do if you want to improve? Let me give an example. You want to improve communication in your school between school and home. So you maybe could brainstorm a couple of ideas using the teachers. Would that work? Wouldn't that work? And then going to the teachers and say, what do you need? What could we as a council produce for you that would help you in communicating with the school? Maybe it's making a little chart or something where you send things home, or if you have information, we can send it home in if you have a monthly newsletter, I don't know. But it's about talking to them and asking what they need, and then sharing with them what you've learned from, you know, this is what we've learned from our and caregivers that they need. We know you're really busy and really stressed. Could we do anything to help you to do this? I have a friend who used to teach in Baltimore, and she did parent engagement. She said it started out, she was the only one in the school that did it. But when the other teachers around her started to see what the benefits were, that she was getting supported by parents loved her, she was supported by them, the kids' grades were going up, things were doing better, then they said, well, how'd you do that? Well, and then Herlene would tell them how to do it, and she would the other teachers would buy into it. When the teachers see what's in it for them, just like all of us, when they see what's in it for them, then they will start to do more engagement opportunities. If you are having your meetings on Zoom, if you're having your meetings on Zoom, and that makes it easier for the teachers, because if they're going to do a presentation, for example, they can do it from their home. They don't have to stay at school for another 3 or 4 hours. So it's just building relationships, seeing what works for them. It's building, it's incremental. If you don't have those relationships with your teachers this year, it's about, where would we like to be in June with our teachers, and how do we get there? And building those relations so that you're really, in effect, building for next year. Next.
All right. What if a school has a principal that does not follow any of this? Any suggestions for dealing with that? I'm glad you finished drinking your water.
Just remembering this is recorded. The Education Act, Regulation 612 and 613. Regulation 612 speaks to the school council. Regulation 613 speaks to the principal's responsibilities in the school. And it speaks within that to the principal's responsibilities for school council. And you could say it's about building a relationship with the principal and doing that through communicating with them. And it's about saying, oh, you know what? I was at a couple workshops that they did for the TDSB did for school councils, and I learned this. I learned that the Education Act says whatever. I learned that Regulation 613, which I think governs principals, right? It says whatever. I, as a school council chair over the years, worked with principals that were so unbelievably supportive. I was blessed, and with principals that were at the opposite end of the spectrum. And it was always about me having to go in and making the first move and talking to them and letting them know that I was here to support them, that I valued their knowledge, that my knowledge could be of use to them and to their teachers, and slowly building that relationship. If you continue to have a principal who doesn't see the value of following the Education Act, again, you can always write to Michelle.
All right. At the first council meeting, the principal said, we don't need a treasurer position because we don't fundraise. Shouldn't he have asked if people wanted to be a treasurer?
Well, remember I said somewhere in this thing that you're leaders in the system, so it's not up to him to decide whether he needs a treasurer. It could be, I feel that the school council may not need a treasurer because the school council hasn't traditionally done fundraising. And then the discussion would be, again, as I said, for the school council to decide what their objectives were for the year and how they thought they might go about meeting those objectives, parent engagement, and if you needed money for that. I will repeat, maybe I should have put it in this, and write this down. In budget line 41,500, that's the school budget line 41,500. It's the principal's budget. On that budget line is $500 from the Ministry of Education for parent outreach, which should cover a whole pile of things for workshops, and $1.25 per student at the school, minimum $300, maximum $1,000. That's to run the school, to run the school council. But you know what? The expenses that would cover, if you were meeting in person, that would cover any refreshments. It would cover any child minding. If you were printing things off and you were sending those, that would cover that. If the principal's going to charge you for the paper, that's what it's for. Any leftover money can be used for council business. So he might be right, because you're sitting there with between $800 and $1,500, depending on the size of your school. You can do a lot of parent engagement for $800 to $1,500. So you may not have to do fundraising, which is what this session was about. But if the school council feels that they need to do some fundraising for legitimate reasons, then it's the school council's decision if you get a treasurer or not, nobody else's.
Nancy, remind me where the $500 comes from?
The Ministry of Education.
Put it in the chat.
Michelle's putting Margaret's putting all of this in the chat for you guys.
Okay, so next question. Oh, I already answered that. Okay, so the person who asked that big heavy question that we said should be a multiple session with school council has also replied back and said the question has been asked of many in the TDSB. So how do they get an answer? One thing that I would suggest, and this is something that we talked about before, is that, and this is, and correct me if I'm speaking out of turn, Nancy, is sometimes what we fail to do is follow up with whatever we've heard. And Nancy, this is a conversation you and I have had many times, right? So with respect to, let's say you've had a conversation with somebody in person. I always think it's a good rule of practice to just follow up with that person by email. Just say, confirming this is what we spoke about at, standing in the parking lot, blah, 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 right? And the same thing could be done of if you had somebody in who was doing some kind of a presentation, the school council could follow up with these. You know, thanks for answering questions 1, 2, and 3, but we don't really think that we got an answer to questions 4 and 5. How can we dig deeper into this? I don't know. Just my
Yeah.
suggestion.
No, that's,
Follow up
yeah,
by email, because people don't know what they don't know. If you don't feel that you've gotten an answer, you have to let those people know that you don't feel that you were answered.
that's true. I am, this is such an important and complicated and at the same time simple question. Equity shouldn't be a struggle, and yet it is. And our students and our parents and our caregivers experience trauma because of the way it is or is not being rolled out within our system. I'm going to make a suggestion, and forgive me if it sounds simplistic. Years ago, when I was a parent, I sat on PIAC, and a couple schools came to us because they didn't like the busing policy, and they got together, and PIAC supported them in some ways and said, come up with some suggestions. And in the end, it ended up affecting the busing policy. Remember what that last quote on my presentation said, that you are change makers. You are powerful. And you have tried to get answers and you haven't gotten them to your satisfaction. You could form a group of interested parents that would investigate and research this matter. And I don't mean, part of it could involve all of the policies and procedures of the board are online, so you can print them off and read them. You could go through the policies and procedures and say, yeah, this works, this doesn't work. Really, this is what you're saying. Well, how are you implementing this? Or you could just talk about your lived experience and come up with, you would have to come up with a written report. Don't worry that it's not some big legalese thing. If you want to make a big legalese thing, that's fine. But you could write a report. If you are aware of other schools in your area or in the board that are having similar experiences, you could invite them to join you. This happens in other areas of the school system where schools have similar programs and they don't like what's happening and they come together. And you can remember I said your role is to make the system accountable to parents. You are required by Regulation 612 to put forward suggestions to the principal, to the board, and it says further in Regulation 612, and to the ministry, and they are required to respond back. And response doesn't mean thank you. Response means to respond to your things. So what I would say is, if you're not hearing the answers that you had hoped to hear, or we don't always get the answers we want anyway, but if you have suggestions for how policy and procedure could be changed, or if you are, then I would investigate it, put together a committee, give them the year or however long to work on it, bring it to the council. This is what we're doing. What do you think so far? Where else would you like us to go? And investigate it. You are leaders within the system, and you can make a change if you want. Yes, it requires time, and it's frustrating, and you'd be banging your head on the wall sometimes. But I have seen that happen. I have seen change be made within our board. So
I was just going to say too, Nancy, Nicole's been putting some information into the Q&A. One of the things our school councils could do as well is to reach out to some of the advisory committees, right? Because
Yeah.
some of the advisory committees might be working on some of the issues that school councils are having questions about. I don't know,
Yeah, a
right?
great idea. Thank you, Nicole. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can find the community advisory councils on the website.
I'll put it in the chat.
Margaret will put it in the chat. Yeah, there's one specific for this. It leaves my head right now. And also, we just had an election.
Yep.
I would go to your trustee. And
And-
I would invite the trustee to a school council meeting. I would be organized. I would know exactly what I wanted to ask. And how it was going to be asked. I would have questions that built on it. Be organized, be ready for non-answers. And what are you going to do if you get a non-answer?
And remember that a lot of them are new, so they're eager to learn quickly, and perhaps you could train them the way that you want them to be working, right? Train them at the bottom.
Any more questions? Thank you, Nicole, for the suggestion.
One more. Last year, there was no information given to parents about how those monies were used. I think this is very common.
What monies were used?
41,500.
The 41,500. Okay, well, thank you for that. Yes, we should always be, as school councils, we should always be letting our parents know. First of all, that money didn't come from them. It came from the board. You have to fill out a PSAB every year with your annual report. That's an accounting of your finances to give to the principal to submit to the board. But we should be letting our parents know too. This is the money that we got and where we got it from, and this is how we spent it. And this is the money we got from you, and this is how we spent it. And thank you very much. And this is how it benefited your children. You're going to want to say that at the beginning. We want to raise X amount of dollars to do A, B, and C, and this is how it's going to help pupil achievement.
And one of the things too, it's not only parents that don't know about it, Nancy, but also many school councils don't know that this money sits there. So the money sits, and then what ends up happening, it gets clawed back. Not the fundraising money, but the other money, the ministry money and the board money. It gets clawed back and it gets used in other ways within the TDSB. Michelle's very good about using it for parent engagement in other facets, but it all gets clawed back. And this is money that's just sitting there for school councils to use for their purposes for engaging their school communities.
And thank you, because I wanted to say, connected to that, I started to say, this money is on the principal's budget line and the principal is responsible for it. So just as I said, the principal wasn't responsible for deciding if council needed a treasurer, that was council business. And any money that council raises is council money and council decides how to spend it. But the money that comes in on budget line 4,100 is the principal's money, and she or he have to account for that. So when you spend the money first and hand in the receipts, and then you get the money back, you get reimbursed for what you spent, they will feel that, quite rightly, that it has to be spent in a way that they can justify.
So there's one more question that's been added. How long before it gets taken back annually?
At the end of the year.
Yeah, so keep in mind, it's not your fundraising money. We don't touch any of that. It's just the money that gets given to school councils from the school board and from the ministry. So last school year, it got taken back like June 26th or June 27th. So what we always ask schools to do is to make sure that everything is called goods receipted. So anything that's ordered or purchased through the board systems has to go to the final stage of processing. That means payment has been made no later. I think it was like in June 2nd or 3rd or something, so that it could go through the systems and everything. So yeah, and then the money gets clawed back like June 25th or 26th or something like that.
So after this evening's workshop, since you won't be doing a lot of fundraising, you will probably spend that $800 to $1,500 quite easily by the end of January. Again, I see it's almost 8 o'clock and I don't want to keep you any longer. I know that you've probably had a very tiring and busy day and would like to just go chill and put any children who aren't to bed into bed. Again, my email is withequalstep@gmail.com. Please don't hesitate to write me if you have any questions, or if you want a sample of the survey that I mentioned at the beginning. Margaret's just put it into the chat. Thank you, Margaret. As I do at the end of all of my sessions, I would like to thank you most sincerely for all of the work that you do for your students, for your parents and caregivers, and for your educators in your building, and for your community. It sometimes feels very thankless, but I will assure you that it is a monumentally important job. And so thank you. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for your work. And I hope you will join me again in a future workshop. Have a great evening and a great Friday and a fantastic weekend.